For this year's Trail Bike of the Year test, we got 10 bikes, all with 120 to 140 millimeters of rear wheel travel, and all priced between £3,000 and £3,500, plus a little bit for shipping when necessary. They were all tested here in the UK, and then we took the top 6 out to our friends at Blacktown Trails near Madrid to whittle it down to our top 3 bikes. And in third position is the brand new Bird Aether 7. This is the 7th year I've been involved in Trail Bike of the Year, and every year the calibre of bikes just gets better and better. If you've not watched one of our Trail Bike of the Year videos before, I'm going to talk a little bit about the bike, then the frame, the kit, and then I'm going to talk about how the bike actually rides out on the trail. As always though, don't forget to like and subscribe to the BikeRadar YouTube channel, and click the little bell icon so that you get notifications every time we upload a new video. The Aether 7 is the latest bike from the British brand Bird. It's a 130mm trail bike, but on paper it looks like a 130mm enduro bike, and that's because its geometry is way out there. Interestingly, it's the only 27.5-inch wheel bike in the entire test. 29ers certainly do seem to dominate the trail bike market, but I think Bird are trying to prove that 27.5 still has its place. The Aether 7 is a full aluminium bike with a 4-bar suspension linkage providing that 130mm of travel. It's not the most polished looking bike. You can see wells here and there, and the raw finish certainly shows you the manufacturing process. Whether you like that or not doesn't really impact on the ride quality of the bike. One of the aspects of the frame design that I particularly like is just how easy it is to work on. Internal cable routing looks pretty cool and nice and sleek, but in my experience is a pain to maintain. And all the cables and hoses on this bike are routed externally, so nice and easy to swap. You also get an external bottom bracket, and Bird even goes so far as to supply not only the torque for each of the pivot bolts, but also the Loctite required for them too. While Bird is a direct sales brand, there are plenty of opportunities to test out the bikes before you buy, and from what we hear on the grapevine, their after-sales service is exceptional too. The bike's 4-bar design, giving that 130mm travel through an asymmetric rear end, has been designed to give plenty of anti-squat around the sag point. It's also been designed to give lots of progression through the stroke to give plenty of capability on bigger tracks. Bird are at the forefront when it comes to kind of radical geometry on their trail bikes. This means you get super long, low and slack shapes. The size large that I tested comes with a 504mm reach, which is 45mm longer than most of the bikes in this test. While the front end is really long, the back end is actually really short, with chainstays at 425mm long. The BB sits at around 325mm off the ground, which is pretty slammed. You get a 65-degree head angle, nice and slack, and a reasonably steep 76-degree seat angle. All this combines to give a 1240mm wheelbase, which is really quite long on a size large. Now, Bird offer small, medium, medium long, large and extra large. If I'd looked at the bike on paper, I might have gone for the medium large for my 6-foot tall, 182cm personal preference. However, what's nice about Bird sizing is that the seat tubes are pretty short, so if you like a longer bike, you're probably going to fit on a slightly bigger frame than you might have otherwise thought. Like increasing numbers of brands out there, Bird do allow you to change some aspects of the spec, whether that's for budgetary reasons or for personal preference. The bike we got was not quite a stock build, but it came in at £3,500, pretty much on the nose. Our bike came with RockShox suspension, so we had a deluxe ultimate rear shock and a Pike ultimate fork up front with 140mm of travel. The Pike Ultimate gets the Charger 2.1 damper, and it comes with high-speed damping control on the top. The Ultimate level rear shock gets a compression switch on there, as you'd expect, but in the open mode you can actually adjust the level of damping within that too, so it's a nice little touch. Nice. Bird provided this bike with a full Shimano XT 12-speed drivetrain and XT 4-pot trail brakes too. The bike rolled on a set of wheels built around Hope Pro 4 hubs and DT Swiss XM 481 aluminium rims. This was the first time we'd ridden the Hope hubs with that micro-spline free hub, which Hope have just released for 2020. The bike came already tubeless with a pair of Maxxis Minion tyres. The finishing kit was largely race face, and there was a Bird branded dropper post with 170mm of drop. Finishing off the package was an MRP chain device. As alluded to, the Aether 7 looks like a mini enduro bike, so when we first started riding the bike we were expecting it to be a bit of a slog uphill. However, what we found was that the bike was actually incredibly capable, especially on smoother trail centre climbs or fire road drags. And that's because the anti-squat built into the suspension makes it very, very stable. When you're sat pedalling, there's virtually no movement from the rear shock, and when you're stood up on the pedals, there's a bit, but it's not as bad as a lot of trail bikes out there with similar amounts of travel. That steeper seat angle puts your hips nicely over the cranks for a good pedalling position, especially when it gets steep. And with a long, roomy cockpit, your chest is nice and open to take massive gulps of air when you're pushing quite hard. Despite having a long front end, the short rear end keeps the bike feeling relatively compact when you're going at more technical terrain too, which means that on a technical climb it's actually pretty good. Normally I would say that a 27.5-inch wheeled bike is going to be a bit more compromised on those kind of climbs because the angle of attack at which the wheel hits those bumps kind of stalls it a bit more frequently. It is noticeable with the Bird that that's the case, but I think the shape of the bike kind of helps you get over those issues, along with that stability from the suspension. Where we were riding on maybe slightly flatter tracks or round trees with lots of acceleration and deceleration and lots of pedalling, if it was slightly rougher, lots of roots or lots of rocks, little rock gardens, the smaller wheels mean you have to be a bit more physical with the bike to maintain the same speed. They get caught up a little bit more on those square edges and on those roots, so you constantly having to make sure you're maintaining your speed, whether that's through pumping the bike or pedaling that little bit more. So I would say if you do a lot of riding on flatter tracks where there's a lot of pedal inputs, it might be a little bit more tiring to ride than a bigger wheeled alternative. The first time I rode the Aether 7 was at the trail centre when Bird presented me with the bike. The first descent was a freshly dug roller coaster of a trail with some jumps and drop-offs and a few berms. It was one of those trails where you could really let off the brakes. I wasn't expecting the Aether 7 to be quite so fast down here, but as soon as a berm presented itself, the bike just wanted to drop onto its shoulder treads and absolutely rail around the corners. I've ridden that track a number of times since, and I've never done it as fast, even on 29-inch wheels, which are my personal preference. As you'd expect from such radical geometry, on the steeper tracks, again the Bird really started to shine. With the front wheel punted way out in front of you, it feels like it's impossible to go over the bars, especially with that BB nice and low as well. There's a lot of confidence to push the bike into corners and chatter over lots of rocks. However, there are two things that are noticeable here when you're doing that. First off, the anti-squat that really helps on the climbs does give a bit more feedback through the pedals than you might expect. So if you're looking for a ride that's super smooth, you're probably not going to quite get it with the Aether on rockier tracks. The other thing that is noticeable is that those smaller wheels don't roll quite as smooth as bigger hoops. Now, some people won't mind that so much, and there are a lot of people who prefer the feel of a smaller wheel because they can feel a little bit more agile. But bigger wheels smooth out the terrain that little bit better. Now, agility is something that the Bird has in spades despite that long front end, and I think that's down to the short rear end. It's really easy to twist and turn through the trees on this bike. When we took the Bird to Spain, it wasn't actually quite in the top 3, but the guys at Blacktown took us to this beautiful trail. It was kind of a freshly dug, loamy enduro track in the woods, quite steep, not particularly rough. And here the Bird really let its wings out and flew. It was a beautiful bike to ride. Because the track wasn't particularly rough, it didn't matter that the suspension wasn't super sensitive. And you could really feel that short back end working beautifully with a stubby stem to react instantly to those handlebar inputs. So it was really riding it on that one trail for the day that really bumped it up through the ranks. If you do ride a lot of high frequency chattery trails, whether they're lots of rocks and stones in there or lots of roots, you might not quite get on with those smaller wheels and maybe the slightly less supple suspension at the back. However, if what you ride is big steep tracks with plenty of catch berms and G-outs, big banked or rutted corners, I think you'll really appreciate where the Bird comes into its own. And with that great value on offer, the ability to change the specs on the bike and with the backup available from Bird, it makes it a great UK-centric trail bike in my opinion. So to conclude, the Bird really stole our hearts later on in testing when we hit some of those steeper, loamy tracks. If that's the kind of riding that you do and you know that you like those smaller wheels, I think you'll love the Aether 7. Don't forget though that Bird do have 29er options, and having tested the AM9 in the past, which has 29-inch wheels, I came away really impressed. So if you're looking for a UK-based direct sale brand with plenty of aftercare support and the ability to change your components when you buy, definitely check those guys out. So that's the Bird Aether 7, third place in our 2020 Trail Bike of the Year test. Let us know what you think in the comments, don't forget to like and subscribe, and click the little bell icon so you get notifications every time we upload a new video.